The year is 1995. The location is Beijing, a city sprawling outward into the dark, frozen plains of northern China. It is a winter of exceptional severity. While the wind comes down from Siberia, howling through the wide avenues and the narrow hutongs alike, carrying a biting chill that penetrates the thickest cotton-padded coats. It is a cold that seems to freeze time itself, turning the breath of the living into thick, lingering clouds of fog. The story concerns the Route 375 bus. As well, in the mid-90s, this route was notorious among drivers and late-night commuters. As well, it was a long, lonely artery connecting the bustling center of Beijing to the desolate, quiet outskirts near the Xiangshan area, the fragrant hills. During the day, it was a scenic route, bustling with tourists and hikers. As well, but at night, when the temperature plummeted toward 20 degrees below zero, it became a journey through a frozen wasteland. The roads out there were poorly lit, as well, bordered by frozen fields and dark stretches of woodland that seemed to swallow the weak yellow headlights of passing vehicles. It was November 14th, a Tuesday. The air hung heavy with the smell of coal smoke from thousands of heating stoves, mixing with the biting frost. The time was just past 11. 100 p.m. The final Route 375 bus of the night sat idling at the Yuanminjuan terminus near the Summer Palace. The engine rumbled with a low, vibrating groan, struggling to keep warm against the encroaching ice. The bus itself was an older model, a long, articulated vehicle with a rubber accordion midsection that creaked and groaned with every turn. Its windows were thick with condensation and frost, obscuring the outside world, turning the interior into an isolated capsule of dim, a flickering fluorescent light. There were only 2 crew members on board, longing for the end of their shift. The driver was a man named Lao Yang, a veteran of the Beijing public transport system. He was a practical man, tired, his eyes heavy, his hands clad in fingerless gloves resting on the large, cold steering wheel. He just wanted to complete this final run, park the behemoth, and go home to a warm bed. The conductor was a young woman named Xiao Wu. She sat in her designated seat near the rear door, bundled in a thick military-style greatcoat, clutching a thermos of hot tea as if it were a lifeline. Her job was to collect fares and announce stops, a task that seemed increasingly pointless as the night wore on. As the bus prepared to depart, there were only a few passengers scattered throughout the cavernous interior. Near the front sat a young man, perhaps a university student working late, his head nodding against the freezing window pane as he drifted in and out of sleep. Further back, near the conductor Xiao Wu, sat an elderly woman. She was a typical Beijing grandmother, stoic and bundled in layers of clothing, holding a woven nylon bag tightly on her lap. She watched the empty seats with sharp, alert eyes. At 11:30 p.m. precisely, Lao Yang engaged the gears. With a shudder and a belch of diesel fumes into the frozen night air, the last 375 pulled away from the terminus. It began its slow, lumbering journey towards the Xiangshan area. The first few stops were uneventful. The bus moved through the sleeping suburbs, the streetlights becoming fewer and farther between. The only sounds were the roar of the engine, the hiss of the hydraulic doors opening and closing for no one, and the rhythmic thud of tires over frozen asphalt. The heating system on the old bus was woefully inadequate. A faint smell of diesel permeated the air, and everyone could see their own breath inside the vehicle. They had just passed the Begongmen stop. The bus was now entering the stretch of road that bordered the open countryside. The darkness outside was absolute, a black wall pressing against the frosted glass. Suddenly, the driver, Lao Yang, squinted through the windshield. Ahead, on the side of the completely unlit road, he saw shadows. They were not standing at a designated bus stop. They were just standing there, in the middle of nowhere, shrouded in the freezing fog. Lao Yang hesitated. Company policy was strict about only stopping at designated areas, especially this late at night. But it was bitterly cold outside. To leave someone stranded out here, in these temperatures, was a potential death sentence. His humanity outweighed the rules. He slowed the massive vehicle down, the brakes screeching in protest in the silent night. The bus shuddered to a halt alongside the figures. The hydraulic doors hissed open, admitting a blast of Arctic air that instantly dropped the temperature inside the bus by several degrees. 3 figures mounted the steps, moving slowly, almost stiffly. While the conductor Xiao Wu looked up from her thermos, ready to ask for the fare. The words died in her throat. An involuntary shiver ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold draft. While the first 2 figures to enter were tall men. Their appearance was bizarre, utterly jarring in the context of 1995 Beijing. They were dressed in long, flowing robes, traditional Mandarin gowns from the Qing dynasty era, while complete with the high collars and braided fastenings. Their faces were shockingly pale, like wax left out in the cold too long. Well, almost translucent under the flickering fluorescent lights of the bus. Well, but it was the third figure that caused the true sensation of unease. Well, the third man was supported between the other 2, his arms draped over their shoulders. Well, his head hung low, chin resting on his chest, obscuring his face entirely. He seemed completely limp, a dead weight being dragged aboard. His long dark hair hung down, screening his features. As well, what unnerved Xiao Wu the most as she watched them shuffle towards the back of the bus was their movement. It was strangely smooth. Too smooth. In the dim light as they passed her, she glanced down. What, they made no sound on the metal flooring. Well, the trio moved to the very back row of the articulated bus and sat down in the corner shadows. The 2 upright figures sat stiffly, staring straight ahead with blank, unblinking eyes. While the middle figure remained slumped between them, motionless. The atmosphere on the bus changed instantly. Before, it was just cold and tired. Now it was oppressive. A heavy, suffocating silence descended. Well, the young student near the front woke up, sensed the change, glanced back, and quickly faced forward again, hunched into his coat. Up front, the driver, Lao Yang, glanced in his large rearview mirror. He frowned. He muttered under his breath to himself, trying to rationalize what he was seeing. Well, must be actors, he thought. Well, coming back from a late-night filming session at the Summer Palace or some costume party. Well, he tried to convince himself that the third man was just drunk, passed out from too much baijiu. Well, he put the bus back into gear and continued driving into the deepening darkness. Minutes ticked by. The bus rattled along. The silence in the rear of the vehicle was unnatural. Well, the new passengers didn't speak a word to each other. Well, they didn't shift in their seats. They sat with the stillness of statues. The cold inside the bus seemed to intensify, seeming to radiate from the back row. Well, Xiao Wu, the conductor, found she couldn't take her eyes off them. Every instinct screamed at her that something was profoundly wrong. She kept glancing back, trying to get a clear look at their faces, but the shadows and their strange, pale complexions made them seem blurred, indistinct. She felt a growing wave of nausea and terror that she couldn't explain. It was then that the elderly woman, who had been sitting quietly near Xiao Wu, began to act strangely. But she had been watching the 3 figures intently since they boarded. Her sharp, old eyes had followed their every movement. Now, she suddenly turned her head and stared fixedly at the young university student sitting several rows ahead of her. Well, without warning, the old woman sprang to her feet. Well, for someone of her age, the movement was startlingly abrupt. She lunged forward, grabbing the young student by the collar of his coat, shaking him violently. "You thief! You little thief!" As well, she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. The sound was shocking in the oppressive silence of the bus. The young student was jolted awake, utterly confused and terrified. What are you doing? Get off," he stammered, trying to pull away. "You stole my wallet." Well, the old woman screamed, her face contorted. "I saw you. Just now, when I was dozing off, you reached into my bag. Give it back. I didn't touch you. You're crazy." The student protested, looking around wildly for help. The old woman wouldn't let go. Well, she began to drag him toward the front of the bus, creating a massive commotion. "Driver! Stop the bus. I want this thief off." "Well, we need to go to the police station right now." Well, Lao Yang, already on edge from the strange passengers and the difficult driving conditions, was losing his patience. The screaming in the back was deafening. As well, he watched the struggle in the mirror, the hysterical old woman and the bewildered student. "Well, are you sure, Grandma?" Lao Yang yelled back without turning his head. "It's as freezing out there. Don't he make trouble if you're not sure?" "I'm sure. He has my money." "Stop the bus. I demand you stop the bus right now. Well, if you don't, I'll report you too." She was relentless, thrashing and screaming, making it impossible for Lao Yang to concentrate on the icy road. Well, the three strange figures in the back remained perfectly motionless during the entire chaotic scene. They did not turn their heads. They did not blink. Well, it was as if the noise existed in a different dimension. As well, finally defeated by the noise and the potential safety hazard, Lao Yang slammed on the brakes. The bus skidded slightly before coming to a halt on a completely desolate stretch of road near the foothills of the fragrant hills. There were no lights, no buildings, just snow-covered fields and black trees. All right. Get off, both of you! Sort it out yourselves," Lao Yang bellowed, opening the front door. Well, the old woman, showing surprising strength, dragged the protesting student down the steps and onto the frozen roadside. "You're making a mistake." "I didn't do anything," the student cried out as the cold air hit him. Well, as soon as their feet hit the snow, the bus doors hissed shut. Lao Yang didn't want to wait another second. As well, he gunned the engine, and the taillights of the 375 receded rapidly into the darkness and fog, leaving the two lone figures standing in the freezing wilderness. The student was furious. Well, he spun around to face the old woman, shivering violently in the biting wind. "Are you insane? Why did you do that?" "There's nothing out here!" "We were going to freeze to death. Where is your wallet?" "Well, I demand you search me right now." The old woman's demeanor changed instantly. Well, the hysteria vanished, replaced by a look of profound, terrifying seriousness. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a long, shuddering breath of vapor. "There is no lost wallet, young man," she said, her voice trembling not with anger, but with residual fear. Well, the student stared at her, dumbfounded. "What then, why? Why did you drag us off the bus in the middle of nowhere?" The old woman grabbed his arm, her grip ironclad. Well, she looked deep into his eyes, her own eyes wide with the horror of what she had just witnessed. "Well, I just saved your life," she whispered hoarsely. "What are you talking about?" She leaned in closer, glancing fearfully down the empty road where the bus had vanished. "Well, those three people. Well, those three things that got on the bus afterward," she hissed. "Well, did you not look at them closely?" "I saw them. They looked like actors. Weird clothes." The old woman shook her head slowly, her face pale. "Not actors. I was watching them the whole time. I watched them walk down the aisle. Why do you think I started screaming? I had to get us off that vehicle." While she paused, swallowing hard against the lump in her throat. "Young man, when they walked past me, a gust of wind from the open door blew their robes up slightly. Just for a second. As well, she gripped his arm tighter, her voice dropping to a terrified murmur that was barely audible over the howling wind. They had no legs. Well, they were floating." The student stood frozen, the cold seeping into his bones, as the realization of her words hit him. The two of them stood alone in the immense, silent darkness of the Beijing winter night, looking down the road where the bus had gone. The story does not end there. Well, the old woman and the student, driven by fear and adrenaline, managed to walk for several kilometers through the freezing night until they found a police substation that was still manned. They burst in, half-frozen and hysterical, babbling about ghosts in Qing Dynasty robes and a bus heading for doom. The police on duty were skeptical, to say the least. They assumed the pair were drunk or mentally unstable. They took a statement to placate them, offered them hot water, and eventually dismissed them as well, thinking it was a ridiculous prank or a delusion brought on by the cold. But the next morning, the mood in the police station changed. As well, a report came in from the bus depot. The Route 375 bus, along with driver Lao Yang and conductor Xia Wu, had not returned to the terminus the previous night, but they were missing. Well, an immediate search operation was launched. The road was scarred from end to end. Hospitals were checked. Nothing. It was as if the massive vehicle had simply vanished into the fog. It wasn't until 3 days later, on November 17th, that the bus was found. Look as well, it was discovered miles away from its designated route, in a location it should never have been able to reach. The bus was submerged in the Mayan Reservoir, a massive body of water far to the northeast of Beijing, over 100 kilometers away from where the old woman and the student had been dropped off. As well, when the authorities finally hauled the waterlogged wreckage of the bus onto the shore, a gruesome scene awaited them. Inside the bus, they found 3 bodies. The bodies of the driver, Lao Yang, and the conductor, Xiao Wu, were badly decomposed, far too decomposed for people who had only been dead for 3 days in freezing water. The medical examiners were baffled. The state of decay suggested they had been dead for weeks, perhaps longer. But it was the 3rd body that truly chilled the investigators. As well, it was not one of the Qing dynasty figures. As well, it was a man who had been reported missing days before the bus incident. The mysterious 3rd passenger, the one who had been slumped over and dragged aboard, was finally identified. But the horrors didn't stop at the corpses. When the police technicians examined the bus's mechanics to determine the cause of the accident, they opened the fuel tank. The tank was not full of diesel. It was filled to the brim with fresh, dark blood. The official police report, if one ever truly existed, was buried deep. As well, the newspapers at the time ran brief, sanitized stories about a tragic bus accident due to icy conditions. But the whispers started immediately. The old woman's testimony, the student's corroboration, the bizarre state of the bodies. And the blood in the fuel tank, these details leaked out. What passed from person to person in hushed tones in tea houses and across dinner tables. The Route 375 legend became permanently etched into the psyche of Beijing. For years afterward, people would avoid taking the last bus of the night, no matter which route it was. If they saw an old, empty bus rattling down the road on a foggy winter night, they would turn away, praying it wouldn't stop. The questions remain unanswered to this day. Who or what were the 2 figures in the robes? Why did they need the bus? And how did the vehicle travel over 100 kilometers without fuel? Driven by a crew that seemed to have died weeks before they ever started their shift. So tonight, if you find yourself out late in the sprawling metropolis, standing at a lonely bus stop as the winter fog rolls in, and the last bus of the night approaches, its headlights cutting weakly through the gloom, think carefully before you step aboard. Look closely at the passengers sitting quietly in the back shadows. As well, because when that last bus leaves the terminus on a freezing Beijing night, do you really know who is sitting behind you?